want yourself to say if you discovered your child self is having a naughty day? The next one is entirely different. I call it One Fine Day, and the fine is a little bit ironic. This is an actual happening. Happened to my youngest son. The chainsaw kicked. He never saw it come, nor felt the impact where the missile flew. He only knew. And yanking quickly down, he pulled the bloody chain bar from his neck and headed for the tractor, stumbling, faint. A nearby friend in horror gasped and threw the tools into the trailer on the run, then hopped the fender by his wounded friend who drove them out, tight clinging to the wheel to keep from passing out, as waves of black swept over him and fought against, gave up. The ambulance was swift and bore him far. He joked along the way to keep his cool, but then they left him sitting in the ER where interns came to view his gaping hole and asked, "How could a chainsaw cut your neck?" And hear, incredulous, his flip reply, "It slipped while I was shaving." But his thoughts grew more impatient as the hours passed. And when they finally came to tend his wound, the natural anesthesia of the shock had given way to searing pain as they injected Novocaine to start repairs on all the ragged chunks and jagged tears. The plastic surgeon stitched and pieced and stitched. "After this heals," the plastic surgeon said, "there'll be a lot of scars. I'll see you back." "You want to bet?" "No way. My beard will grow back in and I ain't vain." And still the surgeon stitched and ceased to count. "That chain went deep and almost did you in. Just missed your windpipe and your jugular vein. Another centimeter either way, you wouldn't just be treated and released." Like well-trained parents, all the staff chimed in. "You sure were lucky." "Yeah, some luck," he thought, as nimble fingers stitched and pieced and stitched. He didn't feel so lucky, nor would they if faced with days of idleness and pain and no insurance. Still, he was alive, and she could go apply for Medicaid, and friends would come and help, and he could rest and heal and contemplate and plan and sip on soothing milkshakes, play with kids, but just quiet games, and watch TV and think. Now we'll lighten it up a little bit. Last summer I had the dubious pleasure of riding with my husband in a dump truck when he was hauling silage for our son-in-law. And they call it Blue Truck Blues. I only took one ride. He made several trips, poor man. It bangs and shatters and screams and whines. It bellers and clatters and roars as it hauls the silage from field to bunk and sings to the whole outdoors. And a vice grip clanks on the driver's door, where a window handle once lived before. And second gear just balks with a jerk, making the other gears do all the work. The chaff lies thick on the battered seat, and eons have passed since it last saw neat. Its faded paint like a cobweb clings, and its ancient engine raspily sings as it hurries back to the big cornfield, eager to wheeze and haul in the yield. Then it chugs and chatters and coughs and groans. It shudders and rattles and shakes, but it faithfully carries the silage in. That blue truck just has what it takes. She tells me it doesn't do that anymore. We have a new engine and transmission in it, and it just purrs. There's another one here that I wrote after looking out my window at my scene one spring morning with the snow about half gone. Looked like a torn blanket down there in the field, and the kids all lined up waiting for the school bus. The earth still shivers, its blanket in tatters, with wind came sweeping down from an ominous sky, when hard on the dawning, the yellow bus, yawning, gobbles up children and rumbles on by. And the last one I'm going to read to you now is one that appeared in one of my columns recently. And I'm really serious about this. The world is full of stories just waiting to be told. And each of us can tell some, the timid and the bold. For one can tell a story of Russian friends in need, while yet another recollects someone's unselfish deed. And one can tell of childhood, its daring escapades. And one can share forget-me-nots in sheltered forest glades. And one can tell of sorrows, another share some joy, and yet another show us how to build a sturdy toy. For each one has a story that no one else can tell. And some may tell it carelessly while others tell it well. But all of life is richer when, fanciful or true, we tell each other stories of how we lived and grew.
Bonnie mentioned she has a column, and you can read her poetry every week in the Journal Republican. And it always amazes me. She writes a column about some subject, and the poem that she writes is very apropos to what she has written in prose. It's a gift that I don't have. This story I'm going to read you now just appeared in the Adirondack Life. It is one of the stories that I originally wrote in this series, but I thought it'd be nice to sell something, and so I rewrote it and put it in a setting up at Branningham Lake, and Branningham being within the blue line as part of the Adirondacks, and therefore it qualified for Adirondack Life. That's the way we got to that. The title of this is Mrs. Riddle's Mystery Breath. Branningham Lake is barely inside the western edge of the blue line that frames the Adirondack Park. In its day, Branningham featured 2 fine inns and a large number of private cottages. Hotel registers boasted addresses from as far away as Chicago and New York City. In the spring and fall, sports came for the unbeatable hunting and fishing. During the summer, it was families, mostly local people who lived close enough for the man of the house to commute from home on weekends, that came up, stayed for weeks, sometimes months. When the automobile became ubiquitous, all of that went down the drain, but not before Verona Riddle had wrought her alchemy. The hotels of Branningham Lake maintained an excellent cuisine. Game in season always appeared on their menus. A great variety of perishables were delivered via the New York Central Railroad through the nearest station at Glenfield, about 7 miles to the west. But the milk, cream, and butter for the hotel kitchens came from the nearby Riddle farm. The Riddles were about as self-sufficient as a couple could be. They milked 12, 15 cows, which brought in enough money to pay the taxes and insurance and provide for the few necessary staples and the building of a nest egg. Another part of their self-sufficiency was a field of wheat that Fred Riddle planted and harvested each year. Fred's wife, Verona, was a small woman, barely 5 feet 1 inch tall, but her contribution to the twice daily milkings and barn cleaning was equal to that of any man's. Once a week, she also baked whole wheat bread. The year's wheat harvest was stored in tightly covered tins, and every week Verona ground enough flour for her needs using her Armstrong grinder. The grinding by hand was a chore, especially as she always ground the wheat twice. But Verona was no stranger to hard work. To get the desired lightness in her bread, Verona used some store-bought white flour. This she regarded as one of her few extravagances. Over the years, she had experimented and had arrived at just the right ratio of white to whole wheat. In her head, she kept the proportions for other baked goods. Most mornings, particularly in the winter, she made a mean whole wheat pancake. She also ground her own cornmeal, using sweet corn ears that escaped picking during the canning season. Now, neither Fred nor Verona were churchgoers. Farm chores always seemed to get in the way. Nevertheless, they strongly supported the Brandingham Methodist Church. From June to October, on the third Thursday evening of each month, the Ladies' Aid Society staged a series of fabulous church suppers. The good church women brought their best dishes, and Verona contributed all the bread. About 4 o'clock on the afternoon of those supper days, Verona would walk into the church with 2 flour sacks slung over her shoulder, filled with her bread. She would wear her hair in a tight bun on the top of her head to add a little to her height. Fred would cope with evening milking as best he could, and Verona would stay at the supper until the last dish towel was hung up to dry. Verona's bread was always received well. It was a chewy bread, but not tough. It had a pronounced nutty flavor of fine wheat with a hint of maple. The Riddles tapped a small sugar bush and made most of their own sweetening, maple syrup and soft stirred sugar. A cup of that sugar went into the yeast mixture for proofing. It was during the July supper that people began to ask about the bread. It was especially good. It had an indescribable quality that everyone seemed to detect and to enjoy. Verona was mystified. Nothing had changed. She had used the same recipe for this batch that she had been using for years. Verona sampled the bread. It was good. The best she'd ever made. Later that evening, on their way home in the dark, with her flour sacks neatly folded over her arm, she pondered the mystery. She was up early the next morning, determined to find the cause of the difference. She ground enough wheat for a small batch of bread and found that the wheat had a different look and the consistency that was unusual. It seemed to have a moist quality. She inspected the tin from which it came and discovered to her horror that it was infested with weevils. Her first move was to check the other sealed tin. They were not infested. Her second thought was to throw out the tainted wheat, but reason stayed her hand. She decided to make 2 batches of bread, one with weevils and one without. That evening, Fred, who had used words sparingly, made the effort to comment on the fine, new weevil bread. Verna was in a quandary. On one hand, she had a world-beating bread. On the other, the thought of eating weevils was repugnant. But she recalled a news photo of an African explorer dining on roasted grasshoppers, and through some tricky reasoning, she decided to keep and utilize her secret. Verona was way ahead of her time. Some experts have said that much of the world's food problem today could be alleviated if nutritious insects found their way into a few more recipes. For many years after that, she baked nothing but her fortified bread. Verona was a true scientist. Though her experiments were confined to her kitchen, she was methodical and meticulously recorded each new attempt. She found that too many weevils spoiled the broth. Careful observation and baking of many loaves taught her how to maintain the consistency of her bread. She learned to seed the wheat from her sealed tins with a precise amount of infested wheat. A cloth bag of mothballs in each tin ensured that the wheat would remain uninfected until she was ready to use it. Temperature was also a factor. If it was too warm, the weevils multiplied too fast. So Verona used the constant cool temperature of her cellar to help with quality control. The popularity of her bread grew along with that of the church service. By the time of the season's last supper, the harvest supper, reservations were required. Verona began to take orders for her bread, and in the ensuing year she baked all day every Saturday. On Sunday mornings, the resort vacationers would drive out to get their Sunday paper and a loaf of Verona's whole wheat bread. In time, she had to limit the number of customers, as her oven could only handle so many loaves. When Fred died some years later, Verona rented their farmland to a neighbor, with the provision that the wheat patch would be planted and harvested each year to keep her supplied with hard wheat. Living alone and freed from the farm chores, Verona became a regular churchgoer, and she continued to bake for the society suppers. During the spring of 1935, Verona Riddle passed away, the victim of a chicken bone caught in her throat. And along with Verona went the secret of her famous whole wheat, high protein bread. When I first wrote that, my wife thought it was terrible. She's a great bread baker, and she thought it was very gross. She didn't even want me to send it in, but I sometimes disobey her.
I started before with a poem called In the Beginning. I have another one here called In the Beginning. So I guess it's fitting to start this segment with that one. This one I wrote with my granddaughter in mind. And she drew a picture to illustrate it. And we said that someday we would make a children's illustrated book of it. We haven't done that yet. But here it is, and you'll hear it for the first time. Long, 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 a long time ago, before even Dad can remember, before there were storybooks, pictures, or songs, before there was May or September, before there were seagulls or daisies or sand, before there were rainbows or snow, before there were children or puppies or trees, a very long, long time ago, when the earth was all dark, without sunshine or stars, with emptiness blacker than night, God thought, and he thought, planning just what to do. Then he spoke, saying, "Let there be light." Then God pushed the darkness and brightness apart, and God made some night and some day. Then he spread out the sky and dried up the land, the rocks and the sand and the clay. God scooped out a place for the water to go, and the waters all filled up the seas. God covered the meadows with grasses and birds, and filled all the forests with trees. Then God made the sun and the moon and the stars, and hung them all up in the sky. He made all the fishes that swim in the seas. He made all the birds that can fly. He made the great whales, and the horses and cows, the honeybees, kittens, and deer. But when he had finished, he thought once again, for something was still missing here. So God took some clay, and he shaped it with care, and gave it his breath and his life. And that is how Adam, the first man, was made, and God gave him Eve for a wife. God looked at the earth, and the sky, and the seas. For a moment in gladness he stood, watching Adam and Eve gather fruit from the trees. Then God said with a smile, "This is good." Got a couple here on nature. This one is called Autumn Trees and was written when we were driving through the Adirondacks in the fall. In lovely golden splendor, the lacy tamarack stands, encroaching swamp around its feet and blue sky in its hands. Behind it towers the black spruce, its dark green branches spread in silent contrast to the gold and autumn's fading red. The maples, decked in scarlet but 2 short weeks ago, in barren gray-limbed patience were waiting winter's snow, while popples, almost springtime, almost spring-like, flaunt leaves of yellow-green and flutter like young dancers in the sunny roadside scene. The spreading russet oak trees and beeches, brown gold still, and white bare-limbed birches bring splendor to the hill. And this one I call the Blue Elegance. It's a winter one. In his bright blue tux and his black cravat, the blue jay swooped from the apple tree, flaunting his crest and his white wing puffs for all the drab little sparrows to see. He perched like a king on the feeder shelf and choosily went on a sunflower spree. Disdaining to sing, he paraded himself and saucily stared right back at me. This one's called City Street. The car is having tires changed. I sit and watch the world go by. A boring day or chance to write? I choose to look with poet's eye. A tall square rig with 18 wheels, sized to a halt at the traffic light, idles and flaunts its glittering chrome, then lion purrs on out of sight. Scores of cars and dozens of trucks hurry busily toward the square, while scores of trucks and dozens of cars busily hurry back from there. The rain has left a tiny pool of water in the parking lot, and someone's leaking oil has dropped a swirling rainbow on the spot. This world is such a lovely place to live. Its trees and people, hills and sky and stars fill up my heart with wonder and delight and make me thankful for this world of ours. Some of you have asked about this piece of wood I have standing here. I don't know if you had a chance to see it when you came in, but you can see it's full of holes. That's what a maple tree looks like that has been tapped and tapped for many years when you cut a slab out of it. And when they sent it home from the sawmill and told our inexperienced logger to either butt them or don't send them, I wouldn't let Don throw it out. I said, "That's beautiful. There's a story in there. I have to look at it a while." And this is what I came up with, which I burned in here. This slab was cut from the fallen butt of a sugar maple tree. It bears the mark in wood and bark where the tap holes used to be. And the clear wood grain, now lined with stain like a map of sweet sap flow, brings sobering thought of lessons taught how the tall and the strong must grow. For life brings pain, and the scars remain, though hidden from careless view. And the piercing dark that wounds the heart taps hidden sweetness too. For lifeblood flows and beauty grows in ways that never could be, except for the pain that shapes the grain of person and of tree. And this little one here, whether you can see, I like to see pictures in wood grain and add a little color to them. and sometimes they inspire a poem, which this one happened to do. As a matter of fact, I've done about 3 with this verse on. Like this old wood, my life shows stain of creeping flaws within the grain, yet the Creator looks and sees 1,000 possibilities and brings forth beauty from disease. Like this old wood, beneath love's hand, I am transformed in ways not planned. And here's another one that puts wood and philosophy together. It's another branch of the tree growing industry's philosophy. I call it living wood, and it's painful, but it's true. The wood that stays within the tree, fettered by root and bark, not free, showers its blessings on us all, the springtime fragrance, blaze of fall. Its fruit grows ripe and satisfies the hungry stomach, purse, and eyes. And oxygen from captive leaf breathes life and offers sweet relief that blesses us with summer shade and breaks the winter wind's tirade. But when the woodsman fells the tree and peels the bark and sets it free, again its blessings on us fall. The rich grained paneling on a wall, a solid, handsome oaken door, or sturdy, gleaming hardwood floor, or clothespins, pencils, paper, shoes, fine fabric, chemicals, canoes, and skis swift gliding on the snow, or Christmas tree with lights aglow. A marriage grows quite like a tree. The partners truly are not free, but bound by customs of the land and chosen vows, they firmly stand. With arms outstretched against a storm, they keep their children safe and warm, and shower blessings where they are on friends and neighbors near and far. And if destruction's axe pass by, the tree, though gnarled, still touches sky. But sometimes nature's habit hits and splits a marriage into bits and sends it falling to the ground, its injured branches scattered round. Then all the years of growth and care stand naked in the chilling air. Divorce's saw blade whines and screams, slicing the timber of broken dreams. And bitter sawdust strews the ground where once a healthy tree was found. The bonds of bark and root escaped. The marriage partners, planed and shaped, still bear the marks of mellow rain that formed through sharing love and pain. And though each goes a different way, they still enrich each passing day. And each a blessing brings to life, not possible without the strife. Unique in ways they both can be, since tragedy has set them free. How's our time coming there? I got a little longer?
Take my time you want.
These two have both appeared in the newspaper in the past few months. One is called Simple Pleasures. Now, money is nice if you need to buy rice, or potatoes, or hot dogs, or cheese. It comes in right handy when purchasing candy, or sneakers, or toothpaste, or peas. But money or none, you can always have fun by sharing a laugh with a friend, by picnicking, playing, gardening, praying, without being broke in the end. And stories are swell and easy to tell, and all they will cost is your time. And a fun afternoon singing tune after tune won't cost you so much as a dime. When problems assail, don't sit there and wail about what a mess life has made. With work and a song, you can solve it ere long if you don't always have to be paid. Though cash is a must if it's Paris or bust, you can always find alternate pleasure by lending a hand. In fact, you'll feel grand. Where your heart is, that's really the treasure. And river of life. There's, I've talked about a river here, but obviously it's the way we live too. Life is a breeze, the young brook sang, then babbled merrily on its way, over the rocks of adversity and the fallen stumps of uncertainty, down to the river of who knows where, and the mighty falls of the daring run, down through the gorge of rushing along, and onto the flats of fascination. At last the old brook emptied itself into the ocean deep and